Considerations to take before choosing a mode for your final exam. Hi, I'm Chris from the Center of Teaching and Learning at the University of Alberta. Being able to accurately assess student learning is essential for all educators. With final exams approaching, the stakes can seem overwhelming for students and instructors alike. This feeling of uncertainty can be exacerbated as instructors navigate through learning environments that are becoming increasingly more remote and online. Thankfully, through careful planning and consideration, instructors can ensure that their final exams provide accurate representations of their students' learning. This video will cover 3 questions that instructors should be able to answer before they decide on a mode for their final exam. What and why are you assessing? What's feasible considering your limitations? And finally, we'll finish off the video by briefly discussing strategies to prevent academic misconduct. To learn more about ways to prevent academic misconduct, please click link A in the video's description below. What and why are you assessing? Your lessons, assessments, and learning objectives should all be aligned with one another. It's best practice to assess student learning based on the content of your lessons, with those lessons, of course, being rooted in your specific learning objectives. So refer to your course and intended learning outcomes as a guide to develop and design your final exam. What do I want my students to know? And how do I plan on asking them to demonstrate that they know it? Assessing learning outcomes. According to the UAPPOL, assessment of student learning at the University of Alberta needs to be aligned with the learning outcomes of a course. Assessments are defined by the verbs used within a learning outcome. This is why we suggest using measurable verbs to write learning outcomes. If an outcome shows what a student should be able to do with their learned knowledge by the end of a course, then assessments can be developed to fulfill these expectations. For example, consider the outcome. By the end of this course, students will be able to define and explain key concepts in moral and political philosophy, such as Platonic form, utility, maxim, right of nature, and general will. The verbs in this outcome have been bolded, and they ask students to define and explain concepts. Given these verbs, it would be reasonable to ask students to give the definition of these terms and explain the general aspects of each term concept covered in your course. However, it would not be fair to ask students to apply these concepts or to make an argument or case using these ideas, at least based on this outcome. If you have a learning outcome in your course that requires students to apply this learned knowledge, however, then it would be appropriate. In other words, ensure that you are actually assessing your learning outcomes. Your summative assessments should not only be aligned with your learning objectives, they should also be aligned with your formative assessments. Formative feedback alignment. Giving formative feedback may seem unnecessary and time-consuming, especially considering the busy life of a post-secondary instructor. However, formative assessment is truly an essential component of good pedagogy. As formative assessments are meant to show students, and their instructor, how well their learning is progressing, it's important that these assessments mirror those summative assessments which will be used to evaluate their learning. For example, if students in your course are assessed solely using multiple choice style examinations, it wouldn't be advisable to only use peer review of discussion questions throughout a course as formative assessment. Similarly, if a course primarily uses performance-based assessments, such as presentations or projects, it would not be useful for students to only experience formative assessment as auto-graded questions. To ensure an aligned course, it's important to check that your learning outcomes, assessments, and supporting formative assessments are all well connected and reasonably lined up. Why are you assessing this? First, ask yourself, do I need an exam to assess these learning outcomes? If you feel an exam is the best way of assessing your learning outcomes, consider, will I give an open book exam? How might I design an exam that requires students to apply knowledge? Realistically, how much time will students need for this exam? As you consider why you've chosen an exam to assess your students, there are many other subsequent questions that will arise. What do I want learners to know? What should be evaluated or assessed? Why is it important that this content should be evaluated or assessed? What approaches will provide the best assessment opportunity? How will evaluation instruments or procedures reflect course outcomes? How will learners be informed about upcoming assessments? What kind of feedback will best benefit learners? How and when will that feedback be returned to learners? There is certainly quite a bit to think about. However, you will find that one consideration will ultimately trump the others. What is feasible considering your limitations? Assessment methods that have been relied on in the past can come up short if they're not modified to meet the needs of the new learning environments that they exist in. Traditionally, final exams have been completed synchronously by students. But the reality is that we're now faced by constraints that are by no means traditional. So, will your exam be synchronous or asynchronous? Instructors must be aware of the impact that a synchronous assessment will have on international students who are studying in other time zones. For example, an examination at 2 in the afternoon in Edmonton is 1 in the morning in Islamabad, 3 in the morning in Bangkok, and 4 in the morning in Shanghai. Asynchronous exams and quizzes can occur over a longer period of time, with students writing the exam or quiz whenever they're available. This does not mean that students have the entire duration to write the exam. For example, an instructor may set an exam to allow students to write from 1 hour after they have started, but the exam itself is open from Monday at 9 a.m. to Tuesday at 4 p.m. One student may decide to write this exam from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Monday. International students living in Malaysia could take the exam at 4 p.m. their time, which would be 2 a.m. Edmonton time. As this example suggests, asynchronous exams are particularly useful in courses where there are students in time zones other than Edmonton. Both asynchronous and synchronous exams have pros and cons. Asynchronous exams allow for more flexibility in the students' lives, but they may increase instances of academic integrity violations. Conversely, synchronous exams can prevent students from academic integrity violations, but they have been reported as being quite stressful for both students and instructors. As a side note, eClass does have the capability to produce different versions of quizzes using random questions. Click on link B below in the video description to learn more about this eClass feature. Your choice will depend on your course, your content, and the contexts of your students. Other considerations. In a face-to-face course, exams need to be photocopied, rooms have to be proctored, and student IDs have to be verified. It makes sense to limit the number of exams given during a course, especially for a large class. However, all of these factors are not part of the online learning environment, so that might change things a bit for instructors. Giving exams using the eClass quiz tool offers instructors a variety of options for questions that they might ask. Click on link C below in the description to learn more about that. Some of these questions are graded automatically, and others must be submitted and graded. The automatically graded questions can be particularly useful for those courses with a high ratios of students to markers, but it is easier for students to share answers. To mitigate this issue, consider using the randomized question tool on eClass. Click on link D below in the description to learn more about that. We suggest familiarizing yourself with all the types of questions which could be asked on an eClass quiz before planning your exam, as this will make it easier to design your exam online. To see the types of questions eClass offers, click link E below in the video description. For those instructors giving auto-graded and written response type questions, it may be helpful to separate your exam into 2 different quizzes on eClass. In doing so, instructors are able to better control the amount of time students have to complete each section, and this is beneficial for a few reasons. First, we suggest giving students approximately 1 minute for each multiple choice question on a quiz. The time for a written response question will vary depending on the question itself. So, if an instructor has an exam with 45 multiple choice questions and 1 written question, but gives students 60 minutes to complete the exam, students may not realize that this should translate into 15 minutes, at least, to be spent on the written question, and they may run out of time. Second, also related to time management, some students may be tempted to verify every auto-graded question before progressing. This is a common issue with open book exams, and students inevitably do not complete the exam. Having your exam in 2 separate sections forces time management on the multiple choice and also sends a clear message to students that they should not and simply cannot Verify every question before moving on. C. How can you prevent academic integrity violations? What is academic integrity? According to the International Center for Academic Integrity is a commitment to the 5 fundamental values: honesty, trust, fairness, respect, and responsibility. Prevention in design. Dr. Roger Graves found that high-stake assessments make it more tempting for students to cheat. Knowing this, instructors might consider giving shorter exams or quizzes more often throughout their online course. Assuming the weighting of an exam grade remains the same, say 30% for a traditional exam is now 30% for exams throughout the course, this turns one high-stakes test into a series of low-stake exams. Students get feedback on their progress more frequently throughout a course, and they're less anxious about writing large exams. Prevention through communication. The literature on academic integrity is clear. The best way to avoid infractions is prevention through communication. Students often aren't clear on academic integrity and find that varying opinions convolute the term even more so. We suggest that instructors take the time to provide clear guidelines about academic integrity in their course and the potential repercussions of academic misconduct. Talk about academic integrity. Be open and honest with your students. Above all, we caution against assuming students know what is expected and glossing over this important information. We trust that you're now familiar with the considerations that should be taken before choosing a mode for your final exam. This video is part of a series of resources from CTL that covers pedagogical advice for final assessments. Click on link F below in the description to learn more about this series.